Okay, everyone, welcome back to class after our first exam. I noticed that a lot of you did well. We will be going over Chapter 6, which is on deviance this week. And so I wanted to go over the results of our exam. The average score was 43.71 out of 50, which translates to an 87%. So on average, you students got about 87% as your score. And you, on average, spent about 30 minutes to take the test, which I didn't think was too bad. So bravo, everyone. You did really great with the exam. I'm overall really happy and satisfied with your scores. If you aren't and you want to talk to me about it, we can go over some of the questions or things that you were confused about. Just send me an email, come meet me at office hours, either one. For this week, like I said, we'll be going over deviance, and you won't have a discussion post this week. Instead, you'll just have your inquisitive quiz, and I've assigned a couple videos that I'd like you to watch. One is on positive deviance, and the other one is on labeling theory, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this lecture. So before we can talk about deviance, we need to know how to define it. And deviance is a behavior, trait, or belief that departs from a norm and generates a negative reaction in a particular group. So deviance isn't necessarily bad, it's just different from what a group considers to be normal. For instance, a woman having a size 13 shoe isn't bad, but it's definitely different, so it may elicit a reaction from those that have average shoe sizes that make up the majority, because most people don't have size 13 shoes, at least not women. And then another example would be police dogs. So when we think of police dogs, we usually think of German Shepherds. So it would be very weird, or not normal, to see a Dalmatian as a police dog. Instead, we'd think it should be, along with the firefighters. And vice versa, you wouldn't think that a German Shepherd would belong on a firefighting team. So these are ways that they can be deviant, but not necessarily bad. So, when sociologists use the term deviant, they're making a social judgment, but not a moral one. So, please remember that. And then, defining something as deviant requires us to examine the group norms and how the group reacts to the behavior. Whether something is considered deviance depends on, to some extent, the time period in which it occurred. For example, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson both farmed cannabis during a time in which doing so was not deviant. Every state had made the use of marijuana illegal by 1937, and marijuana was associated with criminals around the same time. However, farming of hemp and the increasing legality of recreational use of marijuana shows that its identification as deviance is changing once again. So what is considered deviant or criminal and how deviance, including crime, is punished also varies across culture and over time. In the United States, serious crimes are now punished by imprisonment, but historically, physical punishment was the rule. Many different countries, cultures, or regions lack the resources to incarcerate criminals, so they find other means of punishment, such as shunning and banishment. Just as definitions of crimes and methods of punishment vary between societies and groups, they also change over time. For example, during the 1920s and 1930s, alcohol was illegal in the United States, but it is legal in most areas in the United States today. In contrast, heroin was used to be widely available in the United States. It was sold by Bayer until 1910, and the U.S. government even taxed it until it was eventually banned in 1924. So now that we've kind of gone over deviance and how it varies and punishment of deviance, we're going to talk about the theories that are associated with it. And the first one is functionalism. And functionalism says that deviance serves a function in our society. So according to Emil Durkheim, deviance serves a positive social function by clarifying moral boundaries and promoting social cohesion, which sounds like a lot of jargon. And it simply just says that because we know what deviant behavior is, we now know what's considered normal. Without seeing deviant behavior, we would have a hard time understanding what is normal. So it isn't until our group norms are challenged that we come together as a group to defend these norms. For example, the terrorist attacks of September 11 challenged a norm that many people in the United States took for granted: safety. When the norm was challenged by the attacks, new policies and procedures were put into place, such as increased airport security, to preserve it. Another theory that kind of branches off of functionalism is social control theory. And this theory was developed by Travis Hershey, and he explained crime through social bonds. He said that if we had strong social bonds, it would increase conformity and decrease deviance. So social bonds are things like family, your religion, whether or not you go to church, if you have civic ties, things like that. And so if you have these bonds, then these internal and external forces influences our behavior, so we're less likely to commit crimes and be deviant. We also have another branch, structural strain theory. And this one is a very popular theory in explaining deviance, and it's one of my favorites. And it was developed by Robert Merton. And he said that there are goals in our society that people want to achieve but cannot always reach, which creates stress or strain. So this theory acknowledges that there are certain goals that society deems acceptable. So things like having a nice car, having a big house, having a family, a good job, lots of money. All of these are goals that we want to reach and to obtain in our society, which is why we want to so-called chase after the American dream. And the idea that there is a common theme about what Americans should achieve is to be successful is kind of what he's hitting on here. And he's saying that we experience stress because it's sometimes unachievable to obtain all of these things. So strain theory discusses the difficulties that many people have in trying to achieve these goals. The frustration that occurs between knowing what the goals are and not being able to achieve them is the basis of Merton's strain theory. So he came up with typologies of deviance. So different kinds of strains result in different kinds of behaviors. And this table shows that the possible combinations of goal and mean acceptance. So we'll expand on these previous definitions and talk about examples of each of these. So remember that goals are not individual or personal goals, like saving enough money to buy a new MP3 player. They are socially acceptable goals, like the American dream, and having a good job, a nice home, a car, enough money to live comfortably, and so on. Means are ways of making that happen. For instance, means may refer to socially acceptable routes to achieving the aforementioned goals, such as going to college, working hard, and starting at the bottom of the company ladder, but working your way to the top. So if you accept the cultural goals and you accept the way of obtaining these, so the means, then you are conforming to society, you are not deviant. If you accept the cultural goals but don't want to use the means to get it, so you don't want to work hard, instead you just want to sell drugs, then you're rejecting those means and you would be considered an innovative individual. If you reject the cultural goals, say you don't care about whether or not you have a nice home or a good job or a nice car, instead, you only care about making it from day to day, and it's not your goal to obtain the American dream. But you accept the means of getting it, so you accept the idea of working hard and going to college, then you're considered a ritualistic individual. If you reject the goals, the cultural goals, and you reject the means, then you're considered a retreatist. And if you have new goals and new means, then you're rebelling from the cultural and societal goals as well as the societal means, and you're just kind of on the outside of the box. So I know that was kind of confusing, and I will try to post videos and links to things that will help you understand that concept better. But moving forward, we'll talk about conflict theory, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. And again, this is where they would say that deviance is a result of social conflict. And in order for the powerful to maintain their power, they marginalize and criminalize the people who threaten it. And inequality is reproduced in the way in which deviance is defined. So vagrancy laws are in place because the people in power, which are representatives of dominant culture, have deemed vagrancy to be deviant. Sociologist William Chambliss looked at how the vagrancy laws have been applied differently over the years to the homeless, the unemployed, racial minorities, or whoever seemed most threatening at the time, and determined that vagrancy laws actually reproduce inequality in our society. So that's an example of conflict theory being applied to deviance. Richard Quinney blames capitalism and the inevitable exploitation it brings about for creating a situation in which engaging in deviant and criminal behaviors is inescapable for the working class. So in a way, they're just saying that, capitalism and the dominant group that's obtaining power and maintaining their power, those ones are to blame for the working class being, unable to escape inequality. We also have symbolic interactionism. So this might seem familiar. A couple weeks ago we talked over conflict theory, symbolic interactionism, and structural functionalism. So we went over functionalism, we went over conflict theory, now we're going to go over symbolic interactionism. And symbolic interactionism says that there are interpersonal relationships and everyday interactions that influence meanings and understandings of deviance. So we'll go through this a little bit more. There are different types of theories that fall under the symbolic interactionist category, kind of like how social control theory fell under the functionalist area. And so the first symbolic interactionism theory is differential association theory. And this one is a symbolic interactionist perspective developed by Edwin Sutherland. And he states that we learn deviance from interacting with deviant peers. So he suggested that the main reason why people become deviant is that they are learning to be that way from the people with whom they associate. This theory of deviance may remind you of social learning theory, which asserts that we tend to mimic people who are significant role models in our life. So if you think about it, if peers are one of our strongest agents of socialization when we're in school, and they're the most important, and we decide to hang out with the peers that are smoking, that are always getting into trouble, then we associate ourselves with them and we learn to become deviant because of the peers that we hang around. Similarly, if we have peers that, if we belong to a group of friends that are very popular, but they don't get into trouble and they're more concerned with, money and stuff like that, then you'll learn to try to achieve the American dream and be more of a conformist to the cultural goals and the institutional means of getting it. Which again applies to Merton's theory, just in case, you lost that somewhere. Another symbolic interactionist theory is labeling theory, and I posted a video on Blackboard that I'd like you to listen to. It kind of goes over labeling theory, what it is, and applies it in a different way than I am, so it might help you understand the theory a little bit better. Labeling theory is a symbolic interactionist perspective developed by Howard Becker. It states that deviance is caused by external judgments, or labels, that change a person's self-concept and the way in which others respond to that person. So according to Becker, labeling can lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is a prediction that causes itself to come true. So you'll notice that we all have labels. I am white. I am female. I am a young adult. These are all labels that I have. I am a college student. But there is usually one label that sticks out over the others, especially if an individual is considered a criminal. If you are a criminal, the one label that most people are going to associate you with is criminal or deviant. We're not going to care about your skin color as much, your age, whether you're male or female. Instead, you're going to be focused on the label of criminal, and it's going to be hard to see past that label. And if you are a child that is around deviant peers, then maybe you will become labeled deviant just because you're hanging around them. And then maybe you pick up those deviant ways of doing things like stealing, and you learn that from them, and then you are engaging in a self-fulfilling prophecy because you were told that you were deviant, and now you actually are. So the prediction that you are a deviant individual actually comes true through this self-fulfilling prophecy. So going back to Howard Becker, he asserted that when people are labeled, the label becomes part of their self-image. So if someone tells you that you are smart, you may start to perceive yourself as smart. And if someone tells you that you are bad and don't behave well, that may become a part of your image, and you may begin to act out as a result of that label. And labeling a person can lead to that person acting out their label, which is the self-fulfilling prophecy. This is especially true if that label is anchored or confirmed among many agents of socialization. So if a child is labeled as bad by a parent and then by the school, at after-school care, and by friends, the label is increasingly likely to become part of that individual's self-perception. Another couple concepts associated with the symbolic interactionism perspective on deviance is stereotype threat and stereotype promise. They both capture how particular labels, which are both positive and negative, how they can affect our behavior. It is notable that such stereotypes are highly racialized in the United States. So stereotype threat is a self-fulfilling prophecy in which the fear of performing poorly and thereby confirming stereotypes about one social group causes people to perform poorly. And stereotype promise is a self-fulfilling prophecy in which positive stereotypes lead to positive performance outcomes. So those were the theories of deviance. Again, we had the functionalist theories, the conflict theory, and the symbolic interactionism theories. And now we're going to talk about the stigma of deviance. Stigma is a term coined by Erving Goffman, and if you remember, he is the one that also coined the term dramaturgy. And he describes any physical or social attribute that devalues a person or group's identity, which may exclude people who are devalued from normal social interaction. That's essentially what stigma is. It can be physical, moral, or tribal. For instance, a physical impairment might stigmatize or devalue a potential employee at a workplace. A moral stigma could include character flaws, for instance, talking too much, which could devalue a person's input in a group setting. A tribal stigma could be based on membership to a discredited group, which could be a group that a person chooses to belong to, like a club or an organization, or a group that a person is born into, like a race or socioeconomic status. Just as with deviance, the definition of stigma will depend on the culture and the context. And passing is a concept that is used so when we attempt to present ourselves as a member of a group other than the stigmatized group to which we belong. So passing is certainly easier for some individuals than others. For example, morally stigmatized individuals may be able to conceal their beliefs, whereas a physically stigmatized individual may have a more difficult time trying to conceal the impairment that causes the stigmatization. This may also be the case with criminals who commit crimes, but then go to work and live their lives as non-criminals. So again, let's think of it this way. It's really, if we talk about stigmatize individuals based on their moral beliefs. They can just lie about their beliefs. If you are a criminal, though, and you're trying to get a job, you'll notice that on pretty much every application there will be a thing, have you ever committed a felony? That right there stigmatizes you and labels you as a criminal. And so it becomes very hard for that individual to pass as a non-criminal when applying for a job because of that little box that is there on every application. So we've studied crime and deviance. Deviance, so if a behavior is considered deviant, it means that it violates the values and norms of a group, not that it is inherently wrong. However, research on deviance also includes crimes. So remember, deviance refers to an act or behavior that is simply different from what the majority group typically does, and thus generally receives a negative response. In the United States, eating a guinea pig would be considered deviant because most people don't eat them. But in Peru, many people eat guinea pigs as a staple part of their diet. Eating guinea pigs isn't wrong, but depending on the culture that you're from, it can definitely be different from the group norm. So try to think of it that way. Crime, on the other hand, is the violation of a norm that has been codified into law. So if we talk about criminology, that's the study of crime, criminals, and justice. Criminologists study crime systematically and scientifically to help us better understand crime. And crime does not occur in a vacuum, but rather it is intersectional. This means that a number of variables come together, such as class, age, gender, and race, to influence crime rates. There are different types of crimes, and one of them is called a hate crime. These crimes occur when criminals specifically target victims based on demographic characteristics, such as race, national origin, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and disability. Being charged with a hate crime typically increases the punishment associated with any other crime, such as assault. And official statistics probably underreport the true number of hate crimes. So when we commit a crime, we usually go through the criminal justice system to receive our punishment. And deterrence, retribution, incapacitation, and rehabilitation are all ways of punishing, but also ways in keeping criminals off the streets and protecting non-criminals from those that do commit crimes. So the criminal justice system deters people from committing crime, so it prevents crime with the threat of harsh penalties. So if an individual knows that, hey, if I go rob a store, I could be sent to prison for X amount of years, then I probably shouldn't do it. That is deterrence. Criminal justice system is also for retribution, so it's retaliating or taking revenge for a crime that has been committed. In a way, if someone murders somebody else, then say a man murders a woman, then that woman's family is going to want retribution for the crime that was committed. They are wanting the criminal to receive punishment. The criminal justice system also incapacitates. It removes criminals from society by imprisoning them, so it keeps members of society safe from criminals. And the criminal justice system is supposed to rehabilitate individuals, so reforming criminals so that they may re-enter society. I say supposedly because, although these are the criminal justice system's goals, there are a lot of flaws in this system, and rehabilitation has become one of the less sought after, purposes or aims of the criminal justice system lately. So these things, deterrence, retribution, incapacitation, and rehabilitation, are the four main philosophies of punishment, each of which offer a different approach. Rehabilitation, for instance, suggests that we should include education and training in prisons so that prisoners will be able to contribute to society on their release. In practice, these philosophies often overlap. Alright, so a current trend in the U.S. correction system is a transition from government-run prisons to private prisons. This makes incarceration a for-profit endeavor, which may undermine the rehabilitation of inmates in the interest of increasing profits. And like I said, deviance is not always bad. Sometimes a rule violation is actually a principled act that should generate a positive rather than a negative reaction. Positive deviance is defined as an act that is outside the norm, but may actually be heroic rather than negative. An example is taking a stand against an unjust law, or going on strike. An example would be Rosa Parks when she refused to give up her seat on the bus when asked, or even a student in class being the one to raise his or her hand and say that a test seemed unfair. If no one else in the class spoke up, the student's action might be considered deviant, but it could also shed light on an issue that needed to be addressed. I've also included a video on positive deviance, again, to try to help you understand what this term is and how it can be applied to other situations. So that's it for the week. We've gone over the theories of deviance, how to define deviance, and the different ways or different types of deviance as well as crime. At this point, you should finish reading chapter 6 if you haven't already. You should watch the positive deviance and labeling theory videos, and you should take the inquisitive quiz for chapter 6, which will be due by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday. If you would like to look ahead, you can start reading chapter 7, but I don't expect you to. And also, remember that there is no discussion post this week. All right, everyone, have a great week.